Writing about literature. Arguing about poems. Lecturer, Sami Babash. Source, John Schilb. And John Clifford. A brief guide to arguing your attendance. Don't forget to like and share the video. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell for more content to come. Arguing about poems. In the last video we stopped at Step 7, recognize and avoid logical fallacies. We mentioned fallacy type 1. In this video, we will continue with other types of fallacies to avoid. Fallacy type 2, a related fallacy, begging the question, a kind of circular reasoning in which the statement being argued is already assumed to have been decided, is also involved in this example since it is assumed, not proved, that unstable poets cannot have cogent insights about love. In writing about The Solitary Reaper, a classmate of Abby's ignored whatever argument the poem is making and focused on Wordsworth's credibility as an observer. British intellectuals have been either romanticizing or degrading country people for centuries. Whatever Wordsworth thinks about the Highland lasser is almost certainly wrong. First of all, the speaker of the poem should not be automatically equated with the poet. When they write, poets and fictional writers construct personae that may or may not reflect their own views. Second, attacking Wordsworth is a fallacy for several reasons. It first has to be demonstrated that the poet is a British intellectual, that intellectuals have consistently misrepresented rural people, and that the speaker has done so in this particular case. The classmate should revise her claim so that it deals with the words in the text, not her view of the poet's credibility. Fallacy type 3. Professional historians, mathematicians, and philosophers usually cite other professionals working in their field. That is, they appeal to authority to bolster their credibility. Disciplinary knowledge is created by a community of scholars who cite the ideas of its members as evidence for their claims. The warrant is that recognized authorities know what they are talking about. Quoting them is persuasive, but not completely. Appeals to authority can also be fallacious. Literary critics, like other thinkers, often disagree. Just citing an expert does not conclusively prove your claim. A classmate of Abby's, for example, quoted a critic, Ian Lancashire, who says that the narrator transcends the limitations of mortality, but the student did not give his own reasons or his own evidence for thinking this way. This appeal to critical authority without giving reasons or evidence is a fallacy because a sound argument would at least have to consider other critics. An argument is a reasoning process in which claims are supported, not simply asserted, even if they come from an expert. Fallacy type 4. A related fallacy involves using quotations from unreliable sources. Although the internet is often a valuable tool, students sometimes use it uncritically. If you went to the search engine Google and entered Wordsworth's The Solitary Reaper, you would quickly find Ian Lancashire's essay, and since he is a professor at the University of Toronto with many publications on this and other romantic topics, citing him is appropriate. But some of the commentators noted by the Google search are students, perhaps English majors who have written a paper for a course under romantic poets. Using them as authorities would damage your judgment and credibility. Fallacy type 5. Equally harmful to the soundness of your argument is to rely too heavily on personal experience as evidence for your claim. Personal experience can sometimes be compelling and authoritative. Indeed, many critics have successfully used their own experiences with discrimination to create cogent arguments. But they rarely rely exclusively on personal experience. Instead, they blend relevant experience with textual and critical specifics. Telling your readers that The Solitary Reaper is factually flawed because you never saw harvesters work alone when you worked on your uncle's farm would be a fallacy. Fallacy type 6. Actually, the previous example of using personal experience as authority is also unsound because the personal sample is too small to warrant a reasonable conclusion. It is hard to convince your audience if you claim too much based on limited experience. A student arguing that The Solitary Reaper demonstrates that field workers are melancholy would be committing a hasty generalization fallacy. Simply claiming less would improve the argument. In fact, this student might change the focus of her argument by doing research on other poems by Wordsworth, finding several that deal with young women in nature. Using "she dwelt among untrodden ways and she was a phantom of delight," the student might argue that Wordsworth is so enraptured by the natural world that he often blurs the boundaries between people and nature. Fallacy type 7. Another common fallacy is post hoc, ergo propter hoc, Latin, after this, therefore because of this. Few of us escape this error in cause and effect. Many superstitions probably began because of this fallacy. A man breaks a mirror and bad luck follows. Did the mirror cause the bad luck? Logic says no, but the next day he breaks a leg, and a week later his car is stolen. The coincidence is often too tempting to resist. Does smoking marijuana lead to hard drugs? Logic says no, since you could argue just as plausibly that almost anything that comes before could be said to cause what comes after. Unless a clear, logical link between the two events is demonstrated, you might be accused of the post hoc fallacy. In writing about the solitary reaper, you might want to argue that the melancholy strain the traveler heard caused him to have a deeper appreciation for the beauty and mystery of rural people. But perhaps the narrator held such an opinion for a long time, or perhaps this is just one of dozens of such encounters that the poet remembers fondly. A sounder argument would focus on the cause and effect that do seem to be in the text. The mystery of the song's content adds to the emotional response the poet has. Fallacy type 8. Most of us commit a version of the intentional fallacy when we defend ourselves against someone we offended by saying, "That's not what I meant. It was just a joke." The problem arises because we are not always able to carry out our intentions. Perhaps our language is not precise enough, or perhaps our intention to be sincere or honest or witty gets mixed up with other intentions we have to sound intelligent, confident, or impressive. Students are often surprised when teachers tell them that a writer's stated intentions cannot be taken as the final word on a poem's meaning. "Wordsworth knows the poem better than anyone else" is an understandable retort. But that might not be the case. Wordsworth might not be the most astute reader of his own work, and he may not be fully aware of all that he intended. A student would be committing an intentional fallacy by arguing that the solitary reaper is written in the language used by the common man, because Wordsworth says so in his preface to lyrical ballads. While this student should be commended for doing extra research, another student might point out that veiled profound, plaintive numbers, and humble lay seem conventionally poetic. Like others, this fallacy is easily revised by claiming less. Most of the solitary reaper is written in simple diction to approximate the language used by ordinary people. Fallacy type 9. When you try to destroy someone's argument by ignoring their main point and focusing on something marginal, you are attacking a straw man. The student who argues that we should dismiss Wordsworth's credibility as an observer because of his absurd declaration that a voice so thrilling ne'er was heard is committing the straw man fallacy. While it is probably true that the song he hears is not the most thrilling in the history of the world, this is hardly Wordsworth's main point. Writers gain more credibility if they deal with the writer's strongest or main claim. A favorite tactic of traditionalists trying to hold the line against change, the slippery slope fallacy, is used to claim that if we allow one thing to happen, then slipping into catastrophe is just around the corner. If we do not prevent students from wearing gangster-rap fashions, gangs will eventually roam the hallways. If we allow the morning after pill, sexual anarchy will follow. A small step is seen as precipitating an avalanche. The following claim by a student anticipates something that simply is not logically called for. Although Wordsworth probably means well, his praise for the Highland lasser is a dangerous move since she is probably illiterate and full of rural biases and superstitions. His failure to discriminate will lead to loss of judgment and standards. Again, claiming less improves the argument. Wordsworth is less interested in the content than in the music in my heart, an emotional response that we hope does not carry over into his views on medicine, engineering, and economics. Fallacy type 10. We are all guilty at times of the fallacy of oversimplification, of not seeing the inevitable complexity of things. At the risk of committing a hasty generalization ourselves, it is probably the case that your instructor will be impressed if you look for complexity in literary texts and in your arguments. Seeing complexity is a consequence of hard thinking. There are rarely two sides to a question. More likely, there are a dozen plausible and reasonable perspectives. The cliché that the truth often appears in shades of grey rather than in black and white gets at the idea that simple solutions are often the result of shallow thinking. Complexity is not what the following claim reveals. The Solitary Reaper is a poem about a traveller who hears a young girl singing by herself, and like a catchy ad, the tune stays with him. Being exposed to other viewpoints in class discussions and in peer group revision can help this student avoid oversimplifying the experience Wordsworth evokes, one that touches on issues of mortality, the mysteries of emotional response, the purpose of poetry, and the power of the natural world. When Henry David Thoreau, the author of Wilden, urged his contemporaries to live simply, he was talking about their lifestyles, not their thinking. Fallacy type 11. Non sequitur is a general catch-all fallacy that means it does not follow. Some principle of logic has been violated when we make a claim that the evidence cannot support. In The Solitary Reaper, it does not follow that because the Highland lass sings a melancholy strain, she herself is sad. She could be happy, absent-minded, or simply bored. Perhaps the song is a conventional ballad typically sung by workers to pass the time. Revising this fallacy, like many of the others, involves setting aside time in the revision process to look again at your claims and the assumptions behind them, carefully and objectively making a clear connection between your claim and the evidence you say supports it. 2. First draft of a student paper. The following is Abby's first complete draft of her paper. Eventually, she revised this draft after a group of her classmates reviewed it and after she reflected further on it herself. For the moment, though, read this first version, and decide what you would have said to her about it. Abby Hazelton. The passage of time in The Solitary Reaper. William Wordsworth, one of the most famous writers in a movement known as British Romanticism, liked to write about beautiful features of the countryside. In his poem The Solitary Reaper, the speaker enthuses over a girl who sings as she works in the fields. Yet although he is enraptured by her melancholy strain, he is unsure what it is about because she is using a Scottish dialect that he cannot understand. By contrast, the subject of the poem seems much clearer. The very title of the poem refers to the singing girl, and the subsequent lines repeatedly praise her song as wonderfully haunting. Nevertheless, the poem has puzzling aspects. Many readers are likely to wonder if they are supposed to find the speaker guilty of cultural and class superiority when he, as a British intellectual, treats a Scottish peasant girl as a spectacle. Another issue, the one I focus on in my paper, arises when the final stanza shifts to past tense. In the first three stanzas, the speaker uses present tense, as if he is currently observing the singer whom he describes. In the concluding stanza, however, the speaker uses verbs such as san, saw, and listened, as if he is recalling his encounter with her. How can we explain this inconsistency? One possible justification for the final shift to past tense is that it reminds us of the speaker's inability to halt the passage of time. Even though he would like to freeze the encounter, time goes on. Perhaps, therefore, the poem's real subject is the idea that time is always in flux. Indeed, even before the final stanza, the speaker betrays an awareness that he can't bend time to his will. Simply by virtue of the shift to past tense, the last stanza indicates that time goes on despite the speaker's wishes. But other elements of this stanza convey the same notion. Recalling his experience of the girl's singing, the speaker reports that he was motionless and still, yet in the very next line he admits that he eventually moved. I mounted up the hill. When the speaker says that the maiden sang as if her song could have no ending, the words as if are significant, implying that the song did end for him in reality. Similarly, the poem itself is to end at some point. In fact, it concludes with the words no more, which stress that the singer and her song now belong to the speaker's past. Only in his heart, apparently, can he retain them. Furthermore, the medium of print can never convey the sound of music. In fact, prior to recording technology, music was the most fleeting of media, its notes fading with each new moment. By seeking to transmit music, the speaker ensures that he will wind up being frustrated by time. Even if the final stanza's shift of tense is jarring, the first three stanzas give hints that the speaker will end up defeated by time. Significantly, the poem's very first word is behold. In issuing this command, the speaker evidently hopes that other people will abandon all motion and gaze at the singer, basking in her song. The speaker reinforces this call for paralysis with the command that begins line 4, stop here. Yet, as if acknowledging limits to his control, he adds or gently pass. Besides referring to other human beings, these commands seem directed at time itself. The speaker hopes that time, too, will stop and behold. Even at this point in the poem, however, he realizes that time is inclined to pass, in which case he hopes that it will at least move on gently. The second stanza is chiefly concerned with space. Comparing the girl's song to other sounds, the speaker ranges from Arabian sands to the seas among the farthest Hebrides. In the third stanza, however, he focuses again on time. Trying to determine the subject of the song, he expresses uncertainty about its time frame. he wonders whether the song concerns old, unhappy, far-off things and battles long ago, or instead deals with familiar matter of today. Moreover, even if he suspects the song's subject is some natural sorrow, loss, or pain, he is unsure whether this experience of despair is confined to the past or will reoccur. Whichever of the possibilities he raises is true, the speaker is clearly limited in his ability to figure out the song's relation to time. In other words, he cannot force time into a meaningful pattern, let alone prevent its passing. By the end of the poem, the speaker seems as solitary as the reaper. In addition to losing his experience with her as time moves on, he is isolated in other ways. This situation seems to leave the speaker as solitary as the reaper. Throughout the poem, actually, we don't see him in the company of others. His opening "Behold" is directed at no one in particular. Furthermore, we can't be sure he is speaking to actual passers-by or, rather, to the poem's hypothetical future readers. Nor, for all his praise of the singer, does he apparently talk to her. Rather, he gives the impression that he keeps at a distance. Even if he did try to converse with the reaper, he himself would still be solitary in the sense of failing to understand her language and failing to communicate her song to his readers. He does not even bother trying to reproduce some of the song's words. Therefore, despite the speaker's enchantment over the reaper, this poem is ultimately pessimistic. The speaker is left only with his memories of a wonderful experience. He has lost the experience itself. 3. Strategies for revising. Most first drafts are far from perfect. Even experienced professional writers often have to revise their work. Besides making changes on their own, many of them solicit feedback from others. In various workplaces, writing is collaborative, with co-authors exchanging ideas as they try to improve a piece. Remain open to the possibility that your draft needs changes, perhaps several. Of course, you are more apt to revise extensively if you have given yourself enough time. Conversely, you will not feel able to change much of your paper if it is due the next day. You will also limit your ability to revise if you work only with your original manuscript, scribbling possible changes between the lines. This practice amounts to conservatism, for it encourages you to keep passages that really ought to be overhauled. You may have trouble, however, improving a draft if you are checking many things at once. Therefore, read the draft repeatedly, looking at a different aspect of it each time. A good way to begin is to outline the paper you have written and then compare that outline with your original one. If the two outlines differ, your draft may or may not need adjusting. Perhaps you were wise to swerve from your original plan. In any case, you should ponder your departures from that plan, considering whether they were for the best. If, like Abby, you are writing an argument paper, our checklist for revising box has some topics and questions you might apply as you review your first draft. Some of these considerations overlap. Nevertheless, take them in turn rather than all at once. Writing about literature. Arguing about poems. Lecturer, Sami Babash. Source, John Schilp. And John Clifford. A brief guide to arguing about literature. Thank you for your attendance. Don't forget to like and share the video. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell for more content to come.